What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the March 2019 format. Now we had so much taking place up until this point. We got a new ban list. We had the fact that YCS Chicago took place. We had YCS Dusseldorf, which was one of the largest YCSs to take place of all time. We had the Salomon Great structure deck get released, and we also had the UDS Invitational take place in Las Vegas at the very beginning of the month. So this top 5 is going to be very crucial if you plan on going to any large scale events such as YCS Atlanta, which is taking place in a couple of weeks at the time of recording this video, any regionals, if you're still trying to get your invite to the WCQ, or even the national season. That's actually not too far off for Europe as well. So before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you really love the content that I produce on this channel, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to people like Eugene and Zach that I'm able to bring you this content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Kicking things off with number 5, I actually have a tie of sorts because it's very difficult for me to kind of pinpoint one specific deck for this number 5 slot. So rather than having a honorable mentions a little bit later on, I thought I would go ahead and discuss a few decks that actually could arguably make this number 5 slot. First off is going to be Guru Control. Now, Guru Control is kind of just the perfect embodiment of a control deck. I mean, you're playing a card like Subterra Guru, which just allows you to basically control the board by Book of Mooning your opponent's monsters in the form of a quick play effect if you happen to have other Subterra cards on the field. You've got Subterra Fiendus, which is one of the craziest hand traps ever because it can negate anything, assuming you're playing this specific deck. You've got stuff like, Umastrix, which can banish cards, and then you're playing a ton of Floodgates, and you're also playing a ton of draw cards as well because you can play the newly released Pot of Extravagance. All the Floodgates can actually pair very well up against the current meta game, and so it actually gives Guru Control this very nice, niche little spot where it actually can see some success. At the UDS Invitational in Las Vegas, there were some Guru Control players that did make it to day 2, and Guru Control has made its, pretty much presence known ever since the release of Savage Strike, being able to top other premier events as well. So this is definitely a deck you should not count out, and it's definitely a deck that's vying for that number 5 spot. But another deck I want to go ahead and mention is Pendulum, because Pendulum could also very well be on this list, because just the fact that this deck can abuse the Pendulum summoning mechanic, it can just vomit its entire hand out onto the board. It can do stuff like set up boards of multiple negations. It can set up stuff like, locks with Azathoth, or even Kali Yuga, which is arguably worse than Azathoth in some ways because Kali Yuga is just an absolute monstrosity. Pendulum actually has a very good position in the current meta game as well. It's been able to make day 2s at multiple of these premier events as well, so something you definitely should not count out as well. And then another deck is something like Draco. Draco has also managed to get top cut slots at the premier events. It was also at the UDS Invitational as well, which has some of the best players playing in it, pretty much in a massive Swiss event of playing like 13 rounds before it cuts to top 16. So you're having to go the distance with a deck like this if you can pretty much prove that the deck is that powerful. Draco can also kind of do things very similar to that in the same light of Guru Control because it can play multiple Floodgates. It can play a ton of draw cards. And then you also the fact that it can break boards going second because you have the True Draco spell and trap cards that trigger when you tribute summon your Draco cards. So again, these decks aren't perfect. They are susceptible to stuff like evenly matched pretty hard, but at the same time, depending on what your matchup may be, since the monsters are very big or you have the ability to control the board rather well, especially if you win the die roll, any of these decks could realistically be in this number 5 slot. Even Trickstar could be in that discussion as well because it has some amazing matchups against some of the best decks of the format. It's been able to top multiple YCSs of this format, so it's honestly gone to show that it's able to compete, and Trickstar's just kind of been around forever. So realistically, Guru Control, Pendulum, Draco, and Trickstar kind of all just make up my number 5 slot for several different reasons, depending on how you want to look at each individual deck. Now that's going to bring us on to number 4, and for number 4, I've got Danger Orcas. Now Danger Orcas started off as a rogue deck, and a lot of people might still consider it as such, but frankly, when you have a deck that kind of just originated back in YCS Chicago, able to make it all the way to top cut, then you have YCS Dusseldorf, where Danger Orcas managed to win the entire event, and now you have it popping up at the UDS Invitational as well, making the top cut there. It's really kind of hard to say that this deck is still rogue, because yeah, while it may not have the highest representation, I think this deck is incredibly powerful. I think it's a little bit underexplored due to the fact that so many people aren't playing it. It seems like only people of a very high skill caliber are the ones wanting to experiment with this deck, but that by no means doesn't exempt it from being on this top 5 list. This deck has so many amazing things going for it, being able to set up stuff like Azathoth on your turn 1, and then if you go second, you can just basically break your opponent's entire board utilizing link monsters, and you have stuff like, you know, the Nightmare Orcas monster, which basically you just have to make a link 2 to go into a Nightmare, take your Nightmare Mermaid, set off your whole combo, which is going to result in you getting to a Borosaur Dragon, and most likely killing your opponent on that turn. The deck is insane, and not to mention at the UDS Invitational in Las Vegas, we've seen a new incarnation of this deck actually manifest, and that is including zombies. Yes, Zombie Danger Orcas. Sounds pretty sick, and honestly has a lot of good theory behind it, because with a card like Zombie World being able to alter the types of the monsters on the field, that means you're not going to be able to go into specific link monsters that require you to have certain types of monsters. And against some of the other decks on this list, which are honestly, you know, going to be a little bit higher just because of their representation overall as well, it has a very good matchup against these particular decks, and can honestly just auto win that matchup if the opponent has no way to out that card. Not to mention, it's able to set up multiple negate boards in addition to being able to do its traditional Azathoth play, because you have access to a card like Balderdrox. So it's a really sick deck. I'd highly recommend checking out the profile. Asala managed to make it all the way to top cut, so congratulations to him, and Jesse Cotton was just one spot short of making it there as well. So definitely something you need to prepare for. Definitely grab stuff like your Joel Lockbirds, your Lancias, because I think this deck is going to start to snowball, and you're going to start seeing it a lot more often, especially at premier events. Now moving on to number 3, we have a deck that a lot of people have become very familiar with, especially since YCS Chicago, Danger Thunder Dragon. Now I had a lot higher hopes for Danger Thunder Dragon, especially moving into this format, but the thing is, Danger Thunder Dragon's representation has started to fall significantly. Now this doesn't take away from the fact that this is still an incredibly powerful combo deck, because basically you're playing a deck of like a million extenders, and then you're ending on boards that have like multiple negations. You've got stuff like Thunder Dragon Colossus locking your opponent from being able to search, and then you can rip 2 cards out of your opponent's hand with stuff like Chaos Dragon Levianeer and Darkest Diabolos. Like, that sounds pretty fucking good, right? Well, I think the big problem is that some of the other decks, especially higher up on this list, are much more easily to adapt to the meta and play a lot of hand traps that can help counteract these combo decks and basically bring them to a screeching halt. And the thing is, while sometimes these decks can power through hand traps, there are specific ones, especially with lingering effects, that make it very difficult for these decks to play through. So it doesn't take away from the fact that the deck is still able to compete at a very high level. It managed to make it all the way, I believe, to top 4 at the UDS Invitational, if not the top 8, and it still had plenty of representation at the past several YCSs. I mean, at YCS Dusseldorf, as well as YCS Chicago, where it took second place. This deck is incredibly powerful. It is just so insane, and if you get a really good pilot behind it, it is going to go very far, especially in a large event. Now moving on to number 2, we have a good old classic in Sky Striker. Now Sky Striker hasn't really moved in position on the list because this deck just continues to show why it has been one of the best decks for almost the past year now. I believe it was released back in April or May of 2018, but regardless, this deck is just so good at what it does. I mean, you've got some consistency, you've got, you know, just an amazing toolbox of cards at your disposal. You have the fact that you can run so many different types of hand traps to adapt to any particular metagame. Like, it just does so much, and it's able to just show that it can compete, especially going the distance at longer events. I mean, at the UDS Invitational, where you've got some of the best players in the game playing 13 rounds of Swiss, you want to play a deck that's consistent, reliable, and is proven to be those things, and Sky Striker is the safe option. And again, while it's such a powerful deck, is it really unfair? I don't really think so. I think it's still a very strong deck, and yeah, I guess, you know, multiple engages one after another could be a little bit unfair, but it doesn't like stop you from playing the game. You know, it just outgrinds you like any good control deck does, and I think that's really good that we have a deck like that, especially positioned so well in the current metagame. Now, I think people are going to start crying out that this deck should probably get hit sooner rather than later, just because it's had a very long time in our game, but regardless, it's still going to show that this deck is insanely powerful and is going to be one of the best decks so long as it remains in the format. But that brings us on to my number one meta deck of the March 2019 format, and if you haven't already figured it out, I went with Salomon Great. Now, I think Salomon Great surpassed all expectations that people had of the deck because, yes, while a lot of people thought that the deck was good, I don't think people realized that it was going to see this much success. I mean, you see the representation that Salomon Great has had right out of the gate at like the PPG and ARG tours where the deck first debuted because it came out that particular weekend, and then you saw at YCS Dusseldorf, the representation for Salomon Great was just absurd. I think it took up like 44% of the top cut of that event, and yes, I mean, again, it doesn't really do anything like super crazy. I mean, yeah, it can end on a board of like Salomon Great Roar and Salomon Great Rage with maybe one or two hand traps in hand. That's not like completely like irrational, like that's something that's pretty feasible, but then it's able to do and churn out the same board turn after turn, again, slowly dwindling away your opponent's resources, and I think that's why the deck is seeing so much success. The fact that it has the consistency to keep punching out the same board turn after turn after turn, your opponent having to constantly play through these disruptions is really where the deck shines. And I think also maybe the entry point, because the deck might be pretty easy to pick up, it's fairly linear in its gameplay as well. It's not like too crazy like some of these other combo decks like Danger Thunder or Danger Orcas. I think that actually makes it a lot more appealing for some players just because it means you're not going to misplay as much because the plays are so simple. I think this is going to be one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck, for the foreseeable future until there's a huge shift in the metagame, maybe when we get Dark Neostorm in the beginning of May, I believe. But Salomon Great has shown that it can compete in the metagame, it can dominate and absolutely overwhelm, especially at the highest levels of competitive play. So that's why I gave it my number one slot, and I definitely think it was well deserving of that. So guys, that's gonna go ahead and wrap up this top 5. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.